members.
Sure.
Welcome to those that are just joining us. What I've been doing is giving everybody the ability to talk as they come in, and that's so that we hope you'll ask questions as we're going along. Just give it one more minute and then we'll get underway. All right, welcome everybody to our Theory Thursday. Today we have Nev Wittey with us to share. A lot of you know Nev, but Nev, actually, why don't you run through your experience for us? Or, you know, I know you've done a lot of match racing. You represented Australia at the Olympics in 2000, but, you know, you've done an awful lot of sailing. So maybe for those of us on the call that don't know all of your career, why don't you give us a bit of a summary?
Okay. Well, I've been very fortunate. I've been sailing from an incredibly early age. I think Mum and Dad took me out in a little boat at the age of 3 months, and clearly I haven't stopped. Started sailing dragons when I was 11. I sailed VJs before that. Mum and Dad bought me a laser when I was 17, and I was pretty quick to take it up, and I managed to qualify for the World Youth Championships over in Toronto in Canada. So that was the 6th, I think it was then the IYRU World Youth Championships. I have sailed, of course, lasers, done I think 12 worlds and the World Youths, and I got second in the World Masters at my last event. I've been England national champion quite a number of times, and I've been world champion twice. I have been soling national and world champion, and that was the boat that I ended up sailing in the Olympic Games. And I guess one of the highlights of that for me was that I was able to take 2 youngsters from our youth sailing, and I was there for their very first day, and I took those guys and we made it all the way to the Olympics, and we had a lot of success along the way. We've won Kiel Week, a lot of majors overseas, of course, in that class. And what else have we done? I've won the Sir Thomas Lipton Cup in the US, which is probably one of the biggest keelboat challenges you can do. I've done the World Super Yacht Cup, and look, just lots and lots of different boats. I have raced catamarans, windsurfers. I've skippered an AC-45. I skippered Sydney 95 in the 1995 Louis Vuitton Cup. I don't know, hard to remember. Raced Tazars, which I quite like. Done a lot of coaching. I did my first proper coaching back in 1977 at the Shell Youth Sale with Mike Fletcher, and really haven't stopped coaching in one form or another since. And I just love it. Of course, been working hard coaching with the guys that have been first and second in the Etchell Worlds. I have sailed an Etchell for many, many years myself, and won many, many things, and just love sailing. Been a member, or I think I first was 11 when I visited, I came down to the squadron. I think probably versatility has been my greatest friend. I've never been afraid to get off one boat, sail another one. They're all boats, and you've just got to make sure, that you get the basics right. And, I guess like Karyn and those of you that have been sailing for a while, you just fall in love with it. And it's that's what gives you the motivation to train hard, to get fit and do all the things you want to do. But I'm currently right now doing more coaching than racing, although I have my Etchell down at the club, and and a very unloved laser sitting out the front under a cover. It's in good shape, but the cover is unloved. Anyway,
Well,
that's enough of me.
That's you. Well, I mean, what I thought we would do today, given that we are being forced to have a bit more time at home and, you know, normally in the winter months we take a little bit of time out, but we start thinking about what do we need to do to take that next step to what do we want to do next season? What do we need to do to be ready? And to me, it is we need to plan. So any campaign that I've been involved in has meant that, you know, we need to think about multiple things to get going. You know, we need to think about what am I going to sail, you know, who's part of my team, how am I going to pay for it, how fit do I need to be, what's my sail trimming like, what's my boat handling like, and, you know, to me, you've got to start with these lists and then work out what do I need to do in those areas. Is that your experience, Nev?
Look, 100%. The only thing I'd like to add is not every event that I've been in, but every successful event I've been in, we've had a great plan and we've executed. And if you're looking at, I was just thinking, I'm looking at these things that you've done, which is really, really good. You could almost colour them and, you know, like when you're really on top of the situation, you could colour your star gold. And, you know, maybe when you're not so good at something, it should be red. And, you know, the whole thing with this, which is it's a good layout, that you manage to pretty much, you have to be the best at everything to be the champion. And that includes, you know, your management, your logistics. You know, you can have the best boat in the world. You can be the best sailor in the world with the best sail trim. But if you can't pay for it, if you can't manage your finances, if you can't work the logistics of getting to events, you know, it's all, well, I won't say for nothing, but you're not going to go as far as you can. And sometimes in a team, what I've found is that it's often wise to hand over certain aspects of it to the people in your team that are best at those tasks. So you don't necessarily have to do everything yourself. You've got to learn to, you know, you've got to learn to delegate like any boss or any CEO, and you try and find the best people and you also have to allow people to work through those roles. I can remember handing logistics over to somebody once, and the first thing they went and did was spend $11,000 getting us soling to Europe instead of the $3,000 that we could have got it there for with our scheme, you know, our grant scheme. And, you know, that $8,000 that we wasted was a lot of sales at that stage. But, you know, people have to learn, people have to make mistakes, and I'm over it. I've forgiven him. Nearly. But, you know, look, it's really important. But if you can, you know, particularly start with yourself, and I think if I looked at this plan, what I'd try and do is I'd try and get my fitness, my boat handling, you know, the things that are easy to do, you know, knock off the ones that are easy to do first. And I mean, learning to trim, learning all around your boat, and then gently growing your campaign out. Because it makes sense to do it that way, because then you're also worthy of support. You're worthy of planning to go to events, because when you get there, you know, you're not wasting your time. You're not learning how to hoist a sail.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, there's some great tools out there to help you do this. You know, you can start with a really simple sheet, but, you know, there's some more sophisticated tools that I know Australian Sailing are using, and a lot of the top-end Etchell sailors are using to help with their planning. But anyway, the thing is, you know, I think your first step is, if you start thinking about it, that's great.
100%.
Next one is, that's definitely worth thinking about. Even if you're not sailing in a team, I have always enjoyed sailing with other people. So I sailed in a 470 with one other person, and then it got really challenging when we added an extra person in the England, and we were sailing with 3 people. But, you know, it's really important to work out who your team is. And your team, to me, is not just who I'm in the boat with physically. You know, my team certainly was my husband, my 2 children, my wider family. It's your coach, it's your, even the people that you compete against at the club, you know, at club level. You know, they're your team, they're your support, they're your people that you bounce off. And to me, you need to consider how you work with each of those members of your team, when you want to work with them, and what they are contributing and how they're helping you. And you know, any sort of team, it's always a two-way street. You know, how do they help you, and then what do you do in return to help them?
I mean, the single worst feature for me of a teammate, the single worst one, is somebody that is unreliable time-wise. People that don't turn up, and you know, you get people down to do a training session, and you know, somebody doesn't turn up. And one of the things that you've got to really check and make sure you understand is that, you know, the team is a team, and you know, you're not just letting yourself down, you're letting the whole team down if you're late. And you know, this applies right through your whole methodology. You've got to make sure that you're compatible in weight, or that you are likely to be compatible on weight by the time you get to your target event or target selection series, or whatever it is. And I think it really does help if you get on. I know that Karyn and her skipper in the 470 in England, they had a very good bond, and I think that helps you get through a lot of things. And certainly the more I enjoy sailing with people, generally the more successful I have been. And so, you know, you've got to choose people that will put up with stuff that is, you know, sometimes pretty hard. You know, so people have got to have a common goal to succeed, and not afraid to work hard, not afraid to get wet and cold, and not afraid to face a little bit of disappointment from time to time. But at the end of the day, people who have got your back, very important.
So I've always recommended to people that sit down and come up with a team agreement. It's kind of like a prenuptial agreement, and you just talk about expectations, because it's really important that you have the same expectations. And you know, sometimes it does come down to, okay, if I say we're going to leave the dock at 10 o'clock, that means you need to be dressed and ready at 9:45, and you know, I'm not expecting you to be on your mobile at 5 minutes to 10. You know, when you're at the boat park, it's all about going sailing. It's not about any of those other distractions. So, you know, they're little conversations that you need to have with whoever you're going to go sailing with, or even with your coach that you're going to work with. You know, how does everybody work? And you've set up your boundaries that you're all going to work within, I think.
Yeah, and at the end of the day too, when everybody's tired, you know, the boat's not packed up till the boat's
just
packed up.
To think about too. You know, your team is, you know, not just your coach, but your employer, if you're fortunate enough to have a job, or even your university, if you need to be able to go back and talk to them about having flexible time, so that you don't have to, so that you can be flexible about either sitting exams or, you know, anything like that. You need to keep that in mind as well.
Yes. If you add it all up at the end of the day, you do a campaign, you will find you had an awful lot of people on your team, and people whose couches you've slept on and favours you've been given. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Feel free to chip in if you've got anything to add to our conversation. Super important is you've got to look at your boat, and before you even do anything, you know, to me it's so important to have your boat calibrated. You know, you need to look after your boat. You need to have spares. You know, I mean, my philosophy is always, if you love your boat, it'll love you back. But, you know, what can we do at the moment? I've certainly pulled all the halyards and sheet and ropes off my J70 at the moment. They've been soaking. I'm about to make up a complete set of spares, so that when we actually get sailing again, if a rope needs replacing, I'm not held up for a week or so while I get to the boat shop and buy another rope. I've got one there ready to go. And that was kind of always our philosophy. When we were on the road, we had 2 or 3 spares made up ready to go, and they were in the trailer, and they just travelled the world with us. Because, you know, I can assure you there's not chandleries in the middle of China, and you can't just pop down the road and get that that replacement that is super, super important on the day.
Yeah, we actually went further than that. We had trailer boxes on our trailers because we had multiple boats, and we got it set up so that each trailer was set up identically. We had our spares listed. We had a place for our sails. We had a place for our spares. We had a place for our tools. We knew what our consumables were: cleaning stuff, polish, of course, rags, which sheets, lines, or whatever was likely to wear out first. And we always had a spare forestay because for some reason, we're going through forestays. Anything that we thought we would be likely to possibly need, we tried to have it set up so that if something terrible would happen at an event, which it never should, because you should check everything absolutely thoroughly before you go and race. But you could often get out by doing a quick swap between races and not really losing too much. But the other thing, I'm just looking at this photo here, and Karyn, you touched on it, it's calibration. And clearly the Canadians have lost their calibration on how tight their vang should be in those light conditions. I think it's really important for those of you that do have boats. I know a lot of sailing, the Club Elliots and things, which is probably a little bit more difficult. But for those of you that have lasers and other boats, where you may have things calibrated, this period over winter, before you go sailing again, it's a really good opportunity just to refresh everything. So, important marks and things don't get lost. To lubricate everything so that when you go to use it again, it works. And just to check stuff, make sure you've got no leaks. If you did have a leak, fix it. If you had a scratch or a ding, fix it. When you go on your first race coming up, or your first sail, your boat should be polished. It should be clean. As you said, Karyn, all your ropes should be nice and soft and usable. You should basically have no excuse to not have the boat as good as you possibly can. Very important.
In fact, today, Nev, I read an article that talked about actually making sure that your pulleys are ready to go. So you take all your pulleys off your boat, you soak them in fresh water for 24 hours, and then you put them in vinegar for 24 hours and just see what grime comes out of the middle of them.
Vinegar?
Vinegar. Oh, vinegar's good. It's good for your tools.
I
haven't done that? I used to use Coca-Cola, but vinegar's much better.
I use vinegar in poached eggs, white vinegar. I guess I wouldn't recommend you go and unscrew every fitting on an Etchell to do that. But for the laser and for small boats and things, you could probably really, really cool. And if you have, actually, that could be something that we should do for the Etchell Traveller, because that is always coming up. So you say soak it in fresh water and then soak it in for 24 hours and then soak it in vinegar. I mean, there's just grime in the air. We know, I know what it's like being on the hard stand. I see footprints because of the grime that comes off the boatyard at times. And, that grime is going to be falling into your pulleys and things as well. So, it does happen. Well, one of the other things that I do, and I always have done, I felt it to be really, really, really important, is in case of your J70 and my Etchell, you've got a mast sitting there, and if it's sitting up for a year, how many kilometres of dust get dragged past, or how many kilometres of air go past, or knots of air, whatever you want to say, how many particles of dust get on your sail. So for me, before every major event, rig comes out and I polish the rig with Brasso. I don't go too hard on it. I polish the rigging with Brasso. Little things that you can do just to make sure that it's clean. It's a very good opportunity then to check your section. Twice I've found what could have been critical cracks if we hadn't made the effort of cleaning it, where I'm sure the mast would have broken as over the years. But also if you put your hand on a spar that's been sitting up for a year or 6 months or a bit, and then you put your hand on one that's just been freshly cleaned, you'll see there's a big difference. So, air drag is something you want to reduce. Certainly want to reduce water drag as well. So there's lots of little jobs that you can do on your boat to make sure that it's as good as it can possibly be.
And Sean's asking, how much does having fun feature in success? And I have to say, there's a lot of relaxation in everything being prepared.
Yeah, 100%. And, you win an event and you don't just enjoy it or have a personal, you don't have to win. I think as long as you always feel you've done your best, like a personal best, that for me is magnificent. You don't have to win, but what you don't want to do is lose. Being beaten, I consider honourable and wonderful. If I've done my best and you've beaten me, you've done a good job and I've done a good job, you're the better man or person on the day, I'm usually very happy with that, as long as I'm satisfied that I've put in a good effort. If I lose, which is usually because I've made some stupid mistakes, I haven't planned well, just done some silly things, I'm usually very dissatisfied. And of course, if I win, well, that's beautiful. And if you win something that means a lot, well, that enjoyment lasts with you for a lifetime. And that's pretty cool.
And I have to say too, if you can't finish a race because a rope's broken or some fittings failed, it's seriously frustrating.
It is the worst. And there's lots of little sayings to help you get through things. But one of them that was told to me by, I don't know, did you know Graham Gilbert, Karyn, years ago,
Yeah.
Sailing Lasers?
Yep.
And he said to me, a winner never quits and a quitter never wins. And that stuck with me. And it's one of a few really strong things. And so, if you have a bad day, sometimes you still got to try and finish so that at least you can pick yourself up and get going rather than just, to win first you must finish. So it's very important you try and learn to finish, and then later on you learn to finish well. Yeah.
Now I've got here a tuning guide. Your laser and your optimist might not have a tuning guide, but they probably do have some class standard settings that you should be aware of. And to me, you need to be able to get to whatever those fast settings are to start off with. And, and the thing, well, it comes back to the calibration. What you're trying to do is reproduce something. It's no good being fast one day and not being able to produce it the next day you go out in the same conditions. So,
well, I noticed there, Karyn, that you've taken 20 mil out of the rake. I won two on 8080. So it's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe
that was in the lead up to China when we were sailing in a lot of light air.
Right.
So what can we work on if we break it at what we're trying to do down into on water skills or your skills?
Well, guys, I think it's really important you look at yourself as a sort of a case program, and you try and work out, what you think you need to know the most in the different sections. Now, the rules, I think, are incredibly important because you don't want to come charging into a bunch of boats and not have any idea whether you're right of way, whether you give way, what your obligations are. And we have a saying, and it's ROR. So if you know your rights, learn your obligations, and then by almost natural selection, the rule itself fits in. But you don't need to know the rule number. You don't have to be sailing around quoting, shouting out, rule 10, rule 16. All you have to do is know, as you're approaching a situation, what is your right? What is your obligation? And my right is that I've got right of way if you're on starboard and the other guy's on port. But your obligation is not to cause a collision, even if they choose not to. You have right of way, but you still need to be prepared to perhaps take avoiding manoeuvre. And of course, if you're not happy with what's going on with one of your peers, then you're encouraged to put in a protest. A protest should not be anything other than you making an inquiry. You feel that you've been wronged. It's not the end of the universe. It's not the beginning of a family feud. It's just simply, look, I think I'm right. I think you're wrong. And having a protest is intended to be taking the situation to a tribunal of our peers. So it should be theoretically 3 or so people that are members of our fraternity that will listen to what we have to say in simplified terms and then make a decision, because sometimes our judgment is affected by perspective. And we're not always right. I've seen a lot of that. I've been an international judge since 88, I think I became. I've done a lot of rule stuff. I've done 2 America's Cups as well, or 3 actually, as a judge. And, you do tend to see things, people that are very, very honest, but they simply have their perspective is slightly clouding reality. But don't be afraid. So you need to know the rules. you just need to know the basics and just improve. And again,
to me, it's all part of your toolkit. You know, the knowing how to trim your sail, knowing how to steer your boat, and knowing how to use the rules to your advantage. Jack Littlechild, did you have a question? I can see your hand up.
Yeah, so it was to do with kind of the last section. I was going to say in situations, and I think this is quite specific to match racing, but when you have to go overseas and compete in events on boats that you've never sailed before, and more specifically ones that you haven't even been able to get access to sailing on, how do you, in considering that most of the time you only get 1 day or at best 2 days of practice, and even then it's like 2 hours, what would you do? What would you both do to best maximize your opportunity to learn, like what the best angles are for the boat, how to function on the boat, and all of that?
I'll go first. Done a lot of this. And so what happens is you go to different events, and there's quite often a local boat. But generally with the local boat, all the overseas people come in, and if it's the first time you've been to that event, we're all in the same situation where we've never sailed the boat. So one of the smart things to do is very, very carefully keep an eye on the local hero, you know, the person that is, you know, the national champion, the guy that got there because he won the local selection series, and have a quick look. But nearly always, if you do the basics well on your boat, if you tack well, or first, actually you communicate well, you tack well, you jibe well, you know, you don't drop your spinnaker too late, you don't try and set it too early. If you do things in a really intelligent manner, you'd be surprised how well you can get going. And nearly always, when we travel to the events around the world, nearly always, just second day, you know, the local guy is really struggling, might do very well on the first day, and all the good match racers, all the good sailors have worked it out, because they're just boats at the end of the day. So I guess part of my message is, don't be afraid of the boat. It is just a boat, whether it's a super yacht. I've steered, you know, super yachts, as in the big luxurious things. I've skippered the Endeavour, the big J-class boat. And, you know, I've raced lasers and Inglings. And at the end of the day, you have to treat them all the same way. They are boats. They have some nuances, but Jack, you know, they're just boats. And I think don't doubt yourself. You know, if you got somewhere because you've done a good job, consider everything, but back yourself. Don't be afraid. Just, you know, it's a boat. It still tacks the same. A big boat just takes a hell of a lot longer to tack, and it takes a hell of a lot longer to accelerate. So you just work out what that is, and then that's taken care of. And the rest is essentially the same.
Yeah, I'd agree. The other thing I would say is, you know, there's so much information on the internet now, and you know, if you haven't sailed a J70 in Australia and you're going overseas to do an event, you know, to me there's a lot of information you can look up about that particular boat before you go. The other thing is, don't hesitate to ask people at home, you know, ask people at your club. For example, when we went to the Pacific Games, and the team that was selected to sail over there needed to sail a Hobie Cat. You know, they were used to sailing a Nacra. Nacra is quite different to a Hobie, so they got in touch with Jason Waterhouse's father, Rod, you know, who has won multiple championships, you know, around the world. He's kind of a cat legend. And, you know, they just ask him for information, and you'll find everybody is very happy to share information. It's just a case of asking. And if you don't know them, you know, I actually think it's okay to cold call them or send them an email, or, you know, speak to somebody else who might know them. But yeah, don't hesitate to find out information that way as well.
On that, actually, I qualified for the World Youth Championships a million years ago. And I had no idea about where I was sailing, which was going to be at the Royal Canadian Yacht Club in Canada. But I had read an article that was written by Frank Bethwaite about the proposed Olympic course that they were going to be sailing over in Montreal. And I thought, well, if he's done something in Canada, maybe he knows a little bit about. So somehow I tracked him down, and I rang to Mr. Bethwaite. My name's Nev, blah, 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 blah. And next thing you know, I was sitting at the Bethwaite's dinner table, which was quite a schlep for me, living where I was at the time with the terrible car that I had. And Frank was suddenly bombarding me with, you know, reams of information. And it only happened because I was brave enough to ask somebody that I didn't know. And it was helpful. And, you know, I think most of the sailing community are really keen to see people succeed, and particularly young people.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, agree 100%. I mean, it does make me smile. So I sailed with Nikki, Frank's daughter, in '88, and Frank travelled a lot with us in the part of the selection trials, and then actually, yes, did come over to South Korea. And I mean, what was wonderful was he would talk at the end of the day. Nikki and I would just kind of phase out, but you know, but yeah, no, he was an amazing resource to have traveling.
Well, he was a team meteorologist for quite a while, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. All right, back to just looking at your skills. What I wanted to touch on here was, one, setting realistic and achievable goals. So you know, I think that's really important. You know, I do think it's a big ask to say I'm going to win the nationals if I haven't won a state championship, or I haven't even taken on the club championship. You know, I think do things in steps that are actually achievable, and it's not actually all about winning either. It's whether you can pull off that jibe and not wipe out in 25 knots. You know, to me, that's a great goal to have, and be confident in your boat handling for that sort of thing.
Yeah, things become aspirational. You don't. What Karyn said is right. You don't have to be able to do it right now, but aim for it. And I remember we had state championships in the Lasers massive fleet, 140 boats or whatever it was, 150 boats. And I remember doing one race, and I actually really wanted to get around the race without capsizing. And it turned out I was the only one that hadn't capsized. I still didn't win. I only got third. I wasn't as quick. But I remember what a goal that was for me to get through that incredibly windy day without actually tipping over. I thought will never forget it. I was so happy. It was like I'd won the worlds. All I did was come third in the race, but it was pretty cool.
One of the things I want you to keep in mind is, so, you know, what do we do when we go out to practice? You know, so one of the reasons that we practice any manoeuvre is, what we're trying to do is teach our body to work on automatic, so that when I want to pull off a jibe, or I want to pull off, you know, a great roll tack, that I'm doing it on automatic, and that's enabling my brain to actually be out of the boat and concentrate on what's really important and will pay huge dividends. Is you know, managing the race course. So, you know, that's why we go out and practice. And then when we do go out on the water, what you want to do is actually break what you're doing down into chunks. So, you know, pick 1 or 2 goals to go out and achieve in a session, and then call it a day. You know, to me, it's pointless to be out on the water for 4, 5, 6 hours. Because really, after the first hour, not much is going in. Okay, you might be teaching your muscles to hang out there for a little bit longer, but the biggest muscle that needs to be working the most efficiently, your brain, switches off pretty early on in the game.
Yeah, well, I used to be very guilty of that. We'd go out and have these massive training sessions, and they weren't really all that well planned. When we learned, as you say, to almost choreograph our training, you can do more in an hour and a half that you can do in 8 hours if you don't have a plan. And it's better for you, better for the boat.
And I think that's why you'll find, you know, anybody, you know, any high-level coach that you work with will always tell you need to train as you're going to race, because if you train lazy, guess what? You race lazy, and you'll be dissatisfied with the results.
No, 1,000,000%. Training should be harder than racing. So you actually concentrate, as Karyn said, just on the game of chess that you're presented with, not on whether you can tack a boat or jibe a boat or pull a spinnaker up or down. It should be automatic when you're sailing a laser or any other boat, and it's all about the chess game.
So we've already touched on the rules here, and I might add, if you haven't actually seen the rules seminars that we're doing at the moment, they are available on the website, the club website, via the gallery there. Howard, who is an international judge, has been, and a member, he sails on Viva La Vida most nights of the week, or most days of the week. It's a really good session, and I think he's explaining the rules really well, and I think it's worthwhile for anybody to watch.
yeah, you've got to know the rules of the game that you participate in.
And fitness. I mean, you know, you really can't emphasise how important fitness is in sailing. And again, it comes back to your brain being able to work. And if you start to fatigue at all, you know, if your arms are starting to feel tired, your legs are starting to feel tired, you can't hike out there. By the time you reach that stage where your body's telling you, I'm getting tired, your brain's already faded. It's not working at 100%. So that's why we talk about aerobic fitness being so important as well as endurance.
You can't be too fit. There's absolutely no doubt. And I look at Tom Slingsby, who's really at the top of his game, and the guy not only is doing his normal gym stuff, he's off trying all sorts of other things to make sure that he, you know, maintains his fitness, increases his fitness. He's always looking for an edge.
So as Nev said, you know, you can't ever be fit enough, but, you know, the goal is to be able to race, you know, 5-6 days straight in 25 knots every day and be as fresh on that last and crucial day as you are on the first day of the regatta.
Yeah. Hey, Karyn, there's a question from Sean about, and it says, for class rules, what learning experiences can you share about ensuring your sails are measured and certified smoothly? I'm not quite sure what you mean by certified smoothly, other than making sure that the experience goes and you don't have to remeasure them. But certainly I remember having problems with the Ingling headsails years ago. And we went off to Switzerland or someplace for a Worlds, and the measurer going, no, it doesn't fit. And I'm like, it has to fit. It's a brand new sail. What's going on? So I managed to wake my sailmaker friend up and rang him and said, what's going on? And I said, yeah, you sold me a jib that doesn't fit, doesn't measure. And he said, well, how are they measuring it? And you need to know the nuances. So in that particular case, you're actually allowed to put a soft fold in the sail, and it changes the way the sail sits in the. Do you remember that one for the luff curve, Karyn? So, you know, I was terrified that I've gone to Europe, I've paid money for these sails that should have been good, and they turned out that they were. And I think learning the way the individual class measures their sails is probably a very, very important thing for you to be on, because often at these events you have volunteers, and they're well-meaning, they're good people, but they're just told that things have to fit between a line. And so if you know yourself how to do it, that's always good. And so what we've done in the past with events is we've had our class measurer go right through our boat before we've sent it off to events, and we've double checked. So England Worlds, never done it for a laser, but for Solings and for Etchells, we've actually gone absolutely sure that our stuff was right, so you don't get a headache. The other thing I do with measurement is I always try and get in super early, get it done, and then after that all the stress is off. And if you book in early, it can't blow out too much, but if you book in late on the first day and they've blown out, yeah, next thing you know, you may not be able to go even sailing the next day. So I always book in early, and I always try and make sure that I've had everything checked and that I'm on top of the processes that you're allowed to have for each and every individual class.
So you know, to me that totally falls into, you know, what we're talking about here, your regatta plan. So if we're even going to go do the Opti Nationals or the Laser Nationals over in Perth in January, you know, we need to start thinking about what do we need to do before we get there. And yes, if we're going to have a new sail, we need to make sure it's going to be measured and it's going to measure in before you get there. And so you should be able to talk to either your club representative or your class association and make sure that that's sorted before you schlep all the way to another location.
Maybe not silly if there's 5 or 6 of you going off to an event. Measure everything. I mean, you should be able to do that when you pull your boat apart, check it, clean it, do all that sort of stuff, lubricate it. It doesn't take long to run a tape over to check that things are right. And I think pre-measurement's good though. I love that.
Yeah. But you know, if we're going to go over to Perth in January, you know, what can we do before we get over there? You know, we can look at the tide charts, we can look at the wind history for the area and get a feel for, is that particular month normally a windy month from and if so, from what direction? Will it be warm? Will it be cold? Look at the topography. Are there mountains around? Are they going to make a difference to how you sail?
You can ask people if they've sailed there before, and because there are other people around that have. And then the other question you could ask is there anybody you know at the venue that might be a bit of an expert? That's always helpful as well.
And obviously you've got to work out where you're going to be staying and how far away you are and how you're going to get to the boat park each day. You know, one of the things that we did travelling around Europe, every time we went to a new venue, you know, we'd arrive in town and then we would work out where was the local sail maker, just in case we needed to make repairs, and where was the local boat shop. And, you know, generally we were doing that before we could work out where we were going to eat that night. It just needed to be really high on the priority list.
Yeah, true. You've got to be as comfortable as you can be successful. You don't want to have to travel too far. Best events I've done is when the accommodation has been competitive, rather close. And then the worst events I've done is when we've had to do long travels to the boat show. It adds pressure on the team. You've got 3 or 4 people, and not everybody is always ready to leave exactly at the minute you plan. Somebody's got to go to the bathroom. It's always good if you can be close to the venue, preferably even within walking distance, because then people can turn up at the right time but do it their own way. It just takes a bit of pressure off, I find.
So we got any feedback from our audience here? Anyone else got some input on what you might think about before you go to a regatta?
Come on.
Maybe.
So
maybe
Jack,
not.
what was Jack? You just went to New Zealand and you represented the club. What were your take on what we did over there, accommodation wise, facility wise?
So we were actually pretty lucky. We got houses where it was very good, had all the facilities we needed, and the families were more than willing to cook dinner and stuff for us. But it was obviously a really nice thing for us to do, was to also go out and get some dinner for them. We sussed out pretty fast. The first thing we did was sussed out where the supermarket is. We didn't even really buy much the first time we went, but we just worked out where it was and got some essential items, which ended up working really important, especially at our second regatta our first regatta. We bought some little snacks and stuff so we can make our own sandwiches, because the regatta gave us a gift card to buy food. But then at our second event, we did the same thing, and we bought a couple of snacks before we had our first day of sailing. And it ended up being really helpful for our team, because the food that was provided, there was virtually no food provided at our second event. And so a lot of teams ended up starving all day, and they had no access to food, because once you leave the shore, there's no chance you can come back. So that's a really important thing, making sure that you bring your own food, even if there's events where they do provide food, because there's always a chance that there won't be enough, or the food gets ruined, or you don't like it. Another thing that I remember everyone on the team did was bring our own snacks. So this is if you're traveling overseas. So I bought my own muesli bars and stuff like that, because often you can't find them overseas, and then you end up buying something from the shops that you might not like. So I think that's also a really, really important one. And even just bringing stuff, like I know my brother, when he goes overseas, brings his Milo and stuff like that, is really helpful. So food's really important, and working out where all the facilities are that you need.
Yep. And what about transportation?
So transportation,
how would the bus have gone versus the car?
Well, the car is much better than any other option. Obviously, the best thing possible is to have a place at the sailing club. So when I went to Kiel for the Kiel week, there's virtually no accommodation besides either staying at the club, or you have to stay really far away. So we were lucky that we were at the club, because there was many days where we got postponed for our racing. We could just go back and stay in our own hotel, which was right in the boat park virtually. So that's obviously the massive advantage as well of being close to the regatta, because sometimes you have those days where you have to sit around in the sun all day, and it's much better to do it in your cool hotel room. And then, the car's really good, but also we were very far away in our second regatta. And as you said, Nev, it's sometimes really challenging when the whole team has to get ready together and all be ready at a single time to get going. Because often, yeah, I mean, I know for one that I was always one of the late ones to be ready and changed and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't too much of a stress, but when you're doing it, on and off all the time, certain things end up possibly causing a bit of friction, and you want to keeping people happy, doing things efficiently and actually enjoying everything is a major part of the driving force of why we should be doing these things. So being close is a good thing. I mean, you share a house and there's 6 people and 1 toilet. Well, not everybody can go to the toilet at exactly the right time. So the closer you are, the better it is, I have found.
And the other thing is if you forget something, because there's always that inevitable day where someone leaves even just like a sailing watch at home. I think I did that in New Zealand, and I've known my brother has left, his life jacket at home when we went down to the Victorian Nationals, and it was a 40-minute drive, and my parents were only able to get his watch just as he was leaving the shore, and he was late to his race course, and that obviously affected him. So that's the other thing when you are able to get accommodation closer. So obviously booking early is really important, because often these events are with a lot of other events at the same time.
Good to have a checklist.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And so one of the things that you also need to keep in mind when you're planning is planning for the what if. So what if I break something? How am I going to be able to replace it? What if I break my boom? What if I break my mast? What if I tear my sail? Certainly my experience, I just got used to traveling with doubles and sometimes triples of everything. If something was more prone to breaking, I would have more of them in my kit or in the trailer or something. But it's really important to think about that sort of thing. And even flying to a regatta and taking your sails with you, what happens if your sails don't get off the plane with you? And that happens as well. And you just need to think through all those sorts of scenarios. So in that case, while we always flew with our latest good sails, we always had a pair of, a set of not so good, just, the ones that we would take out in 30 knots, just so that we could go sailing. Yeah,
no, good, absolutely good call, because you can't go destroying your good gear unnecessarily anyway. So we used to always take not a dud set, but a set that you wouldn't expect to win a world championship with, but they were good for training. We'd nearly always have a headsail and a kite that was pretty well down the list as well, so we could practice our boat handling, without affecting putting any miles on a good regatta headsail.
Yeah, no, totally.
Look after your gear, your resources.
Right.
We used to get 6 races out of a soling headsail, and we'd have to bin it pretty much. Not bin it, but it would go down the pecking order for being useful. In the America's Cup, when we did it, we would get 80 tacks out of a Genoa. That was it, 80. The front of the sail would look brand spanking new, and the back of the sail would look like it had been run over by a fleet of cement trucks, because it would whack around the rig every time that we tacked, and 80 was the number. So we would often start a race with a good sail, and if we were getting whopped, which on the boat we weren't that fast, it was a big wide boat, we'd often change for the second beat to a not quite so good sail to try and keep the pressure off the, so we had still had a good sail to race with the next day instead of just belting it up. We were, trying to manage our resources, I guess.
So yeah, I suppose we just want to leave you with this thought that most people set up to fail by not planning. So, I think both Nev and I have talked about checklists, and Sean's asked a question here about a standard checklist for new sailors at the squadron. We actually, and so Sean Josie's in an Opti. We've actually got an Opti handbook that Jack Littlechild, who we were talking to earlier, has put together, and we'll get Angus to make sure that that's available for our sailors looking forward to next season.
You can write your own lists out too, though.
Oh yeah, no,
sure.
totally.
Please.
But you know, this is a good guide too, I think, for how you want, what you want to be doing with your optimist, and how you might want to start your setup.
Make sure there's a marking pen on that list.
Yes, I have a few permanent markers.
Yep.
So,
and guys, you can always ask us anyway, of course. You're welcome.
Yeah, if you do forget something, what's the best thing to do? That's a good question, Madeline. I would say first thing is don't panic. Like sometimes it really panics you when you go, okay, I left my wetsuit boots at home. Can I sail with bare feet? Well, actually, probably yes. So, you know, don't panic. Sometimes you might forget your watch. You know, again, it's a good lesson actually to try starting a race and not necessarily having your watch with you. You know, you've got to keep an eye on the boats around you, and just make sure that you're up and level with them. You might not exactly know when to pull the pin, but you know, you've got to use a few other sensors to get off the line then. So,
a terrible admission, but when I first started sailing, almost nobody had a starting watch. They just weren't around. And so we had to count the last 60 seconds ourselves, and yeah, exactly, keep an eye on the other guy, and that's how we did it.
Yeah. So whether it's
good.
Yeah, whether you have a checklist, you know, for things like that, pack your bag the night before, you know, so you can double check it before you walk out the door. In many cases, it is just about being organised, and you know, if you have forgotten something and it's critical, to ask someone else might have a spare. You know, don't hesitate to ask the sailors around you, because someone might be able to help you out too.
With your sailing clothing, if you have the ability to do it, I used to find always good to have at least 2 of everything, because what you didn't do was leave a pair of sailing gloves on the line or a pair of boots on the line, you know, drying. And particularly if you go to venues that you're not used to, that things aren't where you normally expect them. And every time you come home, as you said, Karyn, it's what reminded me, you pack your bag at night. Well, your stuff's already dried that day, and you don't have to panic about doing anything. Just rinse your gear out, hang it out, and you don't have to worry about it till the next afternoon as well. And like I said, the chances of forgetting something because you're doing something, you know, at the last minute in the morning is greatly reduced, and also it's a bit more comfortable if you can have a couple of wetsuits, a couple of sets of boots. And I know it's expensive, but I certainly used to do that.
It's way more comfortable than putting on that wetsuit.
Oh, I used to do it between races in the Edgefields. It was great. Dry wetsuit, dry boots, beautiful.
So we got any other comments, any questions from anybody?
It's really interesting doing the sailing coach course as well. A lot of the people listening now, I know, are doing it this week too, and how much they do talk about planning for all the different situations and scenarios, and just having backup plans and that kind of thing. So yeah, that is an interesting thing to discuss and have in the back of your mind for sure.
Well, we haven't really touched on a specific area, but you know, any starting plan has got to have the plan B. You know, you've got to know when to bail out, and know that, you know, your plan A, you're not going to pull off, and you need to bail out, because otherwise you will be, you know, starting DFL, and you know.
What does that mean, Karyn?
No, sorry. You're starting at the back end, and you don't want to go there. So.
And to help you on that one, there's a saying, another one of these beautiful golden rules: don't push a bad situation. You know, if you think you're going to be early and you're looking and you've got 20 seconds, you're going to think, oh my goodness, I'm going to be early. You might actually find that at 30 seconds or even earlier, you knew you're in trouble. That's the time to bail out and have another go. So instead of going 0 knots over the line, having to wait for everybody and go back, you might be able to make a really cool start by, you know, being just a second late, but being fast because you've turned out early, and, you know, you've been able to have another crack at the line. And I can assure you, the times where we've realised early that things weren't going so well and we've bailed out early, we've often actually suffered nothing. But whereas if we'd pushed it and gone slow, probably taken a penalty, you know, the race would be over at the start. So it's a good thing. Don't push a bad thing.
All right, we might wrap it up there. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Nev, for sharing your advice with us. And we look forward to seeing you all next week.